In 4 years, when Donald Trump's second term is up, he is constitutionally prohibited from serving a third. He's joked about running again.
I've raised a lot of money for the next race that I assume I can't use for myself, but I'm not 100% sure because I don't know. I think I'm not allowed to run again. I'm not sure.
But on Sunday, we saw Trump's clearest expression yet that he's actually serious. President Donald Trump said in a Sunday morning phone call that he was not joking about a third term. The article goes on. When asked whether he has been presented with plans to allow him to seek a third term, Trump said, "There are methods which you could do it."
He told me he's not joking. He said there are other methods. I asked if he could give me details, and he said flatly, no.
And Trump's allies believe where there's a will, there's a way.
I'm a firm believer that President Trump will run and win again in 2028. So I've already endorsed President Trump.
You know he's term limited. How do you think he gets another term?
We're working on it. I think we'll have a couple of alternatives. Let's say that.
So let's go through what some of those alternatives might be. Now, the main hurdle for any president seeking a third term is the U.S. Constitution itself. The 22nd Amendment starts by saying, "No person shall be elected to the office of the president more than twice." I mean, that's pretty clear, right? For 70 plus years, for as long as that's been in the Constitution, that has been enough to keep anyone from running a third time. But there is a way around it. And one of Trump's allies figured it out just 3 days after Trump was inaugurated for his second term. You simply changed the Constitution. Here's the official proposal from Tennessee Republican Andy Ogles, a joint resolution to change the 22nd Amendment to read instead, "No person shall be elected to the office of the president more than 3 times. And as if to prove that this is really just about giving Trump and nobody else a constitutional backdoor, it goes on to say that no person shall be elected to any additional term after being elected to 2 consecutive terms. So if you're Donald Trump and you've never served 2 consecutive terms, you're good to go for a third. But if you're like, say, Barack Obama, who was elected to 2 consecutive terms, the very specific way this proposed amendment was written blocks him from ever running again. But constitutional amendments are hard.
Option number 1 is you'd have to get 2/3 of both houses of Congress and 3/4 of the states to agree on a constitutional amendment. The alternative method for amending the Constitution, which has never been done, is to get an agreement among 2/3 of the states to call a constitutional convention. And then once you've made the amendment, you have to still get 3/4 of the states to agree.
This is a very difficult bar to reach. Republicans only have a very slim majority, just over 50% in both chambers of Congress. Getting 3/4 of states on board when nearly 20 of them are controlled by Democrats, that's a pretty tall order too. So most experts agree. This most straightforward route for Trump to overcome this constitutional barrier is also the hardest and least likely.
That's an extremely high bar to meet, which is why we have so few amendments to the U.S. Constitution.
The way I say this to my students, we could not get 2/3 of Congress and 3/4 of the states to agree that sunshine feels great after a cold wintry day. We're just that divided in America right now.
So what if Trump chooses not to be elected to a third term, but maybe just becomes president again by default? Throughout American history, whenever a president has died while in office, there's always a succession plan.
If a president is resigning or is incapacitated in some way, then the vice president automatically steps in to fill that role.
And Trump could be that VP. Now, nobody's saying that Trump needs a running mate who's literally willing to die for him, because we've also seen what happens when a president simply resigns.
I shall resign the presidency effective at noon tomorrow. Vice President Ford will be sworn in as president at that hour.
Gerald Ford is actually a fascinating example because Nixon was president and Spiro Agnew was his vice president. Spiro Agnew has to resign because of legal controversies, which created a vacancy in the vice presidency. Nixon selected Gerald Ford to be his vice president. And under the Constitution that was approved by Congress, then Nixon resigns and Gerald Ford becomes president of the United States.
Yes, a president can voluntarily cede power to their vice president. And so, the theory goes, Trump could simply run for VP alongside a trusted presidential candidate who, upon winning the election, would cede power back to Trump, giving him his third term.
Because the 22nd Amendment says nobody shall be elected to the office of the president more than twice. So in that case, Trump wouldn't be elected, he would be appointed.
And Trump seemed to see promise here when NBC News asked him directly on a phone call if this was something he had considered. Trump responded that that's one method. And we saw something similar happen in Russia, where Vladimir Putin also ran up against a 2-term limit in 2008. And so, as a technical workaround, he took on the role of prime minister instead.
Putin was still effectively the ruler of Russia at that point. What he did was to step away from the presidency and become prime minister, but essentially was still the most powerful figure in Russia.
Now, as far as Trump is concerned, there is a wrinkle in this plan to ascend to the presidency through the vice presidency, and that is getting onto the ticket at all. The 12th Amendment of the U.S. Constitution states no person constitutionally ineligible to the office of president shall be eligible to that of vice president of the United States. That is to say, if you can't be president, then maybe you can't be vice president either. Or maybe this argument doesn't actually hold up.
Some people are arguing that the 22nd Amendment isn't an eligibility requirement, that the eligibility requirements really are what are in the initial Constitution in terms of, the president's age, that he can't be under 35, and that they have to be a natural born citizen, et cetera, and that the 22nd Amendment isn't really adding an eligibility requirement.
But bottom line, interpreting the Constitution is tricky legal work. And if a case of this scale goes all the way to the Supreme Court, those justices would ultimately have the power to decide which legal interpretation rules the day. Then you could look at how those judges lean and how many were appointed by Trump himself, but I'm not so foolish as to venture any kind of guess at an outcome here. So let's move on to one other way Trump could stay on as president indefinitely.
I don't want to talk about a third term now because no matter how you look at it, we got a long time to go. We have a long time.
Trump has demonstrated a willingness to bend rules by declaring emergencies. On day one of Trump's second term, the White House declared a national emergency at the southern border to deploy more people, resources, and physical barriers without congressional approval. Trump invoked the International Emergency Economic Powers Act to impose tariffs on Canada and Mexico, citing an extraordinary threat to national security and calling drugs like fentanyl a national emergency. He routinely issues sweeping executive orders, more than 100 of them so far, on the grounds that U.S. safety and security is at stake. And along those lines, given the right kind of emergency, elections themselves can be delayed. This is, for example, how Ukraine's president has managed to avoid holding an election, despite his term ending last year.
Congress does have the authority to be able to set the date for federal elections. But again, what's really important is the Constitution is clear. It actually says your term expires at a certain date, which means even if he doesn't hold the elections, he's no longer president of the United States. I mean, I'm trying to think of the way of thinking about it here. In Canada, even though, the government has called for early elections, there's an absolute date upon which they have to hold elections. And I don't think there's anything in Canadian law that allows somebody to stay in office beyond the expiration of their time. It's possible. If that were to happen, that would be the surest sign that the United States is no longer a constitutional democracy. Because at that point, elections have been suspended. He has stayed in office beyond what the Constitution allows. To me, that basically is the indication that American democracy has come to an end at that point.
But these are all just theories, right? Some would even argue a distraction from things like market downturns, hits to consumer confidence. You get the idea. But something else worth pointing out, this other page from Trump's playbook, which is to repeat something so outrageous enough times that it sort of loses its shock value.
I think that that's, part of the rhetorical strategy is to just continue to blast out all of this material that, is so outrageous that anything short of that will come to seem more reasonable.
It will be the greatest honor of my life to serve not once, but twice, or 3 times, or 4 times. Headlines from the fake news. No, it will be to serve twice.
Whether it's purchasing Greenland or taking over the Panama Canal or annexing Canada, these are all threats that began in the realm of the implausible, but over time grew to be taken more seriously. What's really hard to do, though, is to be able to tell what's serious and what's just shooting from the hip.